Hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you so much for being here with us in the third iteration of our online English teaching conference. We're so excited that we're starting with all of you. We can see people will keep coming in as we're going along. We've got about 80 people now joining us. That's really great. You should have access to the chat, all of you. So first of all, we hope you can hear us okay. And secondly, please let us know, where are you joining us from today? And is it morning time? If it's morning time, I hope you've had time to have some breakfast. Or is it the afternoon where you are? My name is Martina, and I'm the Director of Teacher Training and Development at EF Teach Online. And again, a very warm welcome to our third conference. EF Teach Online, we've been teaching English since 1997. And a few years ago, we thought, well, isn't this a good time to start sharing all of the great things that we know, all of the practices that we have seen thousands and thousands of people use on our platforms. But isn't it great to also bring people together from all over the world to share what they are seeing, what they're experiencing in their own online English teaching contexts. So we're very happy that you're here with us. Just a few housekeeping items as we're going along. You should all have access to the raised hand function. I can see someone has already raised their hand there, which is really great. You should also have access to the reactions. So you can send us emojis as we're going along. Why don't you send us an emoji with a thumbs up to let us know that you can hear us, or a heart if you're enjoying this conference already. I can see some raised hands. The chat is disabled at the moment, I can see, but no worries, we're going to enable it in just one moment. I can see people raising their hands. That's amazing. And we will also make sure that you have access to all of the reactions now. Super. So I think we are all set up and ready to go. I can see emojis have started coming in. Thank you so much for this. And what I'm going to do now is just hand over to Jane, who's going to introduce our wonderful opening plenary speaker today. Jane, over to you.
Thank you so much, Martina. Hi, my name is Jane. A very warm welcome to this conference. We are thrilled to kick off with a plenary session prepared by Ian McMaster entitled Language, Communication, Behaviour and Culture, What Are We Trying to Affect? Ian is a business communication consultant, journalist and author. Originally from the UK, where he studied economics, he has been based in Munich for the past 35 years, working extensively in light training and publishing in Germany. From 2001 to 2021, Ian was the editor-in-chief of the business communication magazine, Business Spotlight. Before that, he held the same position at the general interest magazine Spotlight. As a coordinator for the Business Teachers Special Interest Group, IATEFL BC, and a regular presenter at international conferences, Ian has left a lasting impression on many, including myself. And our paths crossed at a conference for English teachers in Switzerland, where his engaging presentation style and thought-provoking discussions and rich content immediately captivated me. So much so that I was compelled to purchase his latest book, co-authored with Bob Dignan. Ian's newest publication, Trainingsbuch Business English, is a treasure trove for insights on communication and collaboration with international teams, and I highly recommend it. Let's now give a warm welcome to Ian McMaster and enjoy his talk. Thank you.
Jane, thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me well. As you can see, I've deliberately not put on a pink shirt today so as not to clash with the pink background. In fact, I'm not sure I have a pink shirt, but anyway. I'm based in Munich in Germany. I'll say a little bit more about myself in a minute. Jane's already said something. Thank you very much, Jane. Now you can see here the title here, Language, Communication, Behaviour and Culture. What are we trying to affect? So what I'm going to try to do in the next 40 minutes is to run through some issues in these 4 areas. You may agree with me, you may disagree with me. Feel free to add your comments in the chat. Feel free to ask questions in the Q&A, which I will have time for afterwards to pick up the questions. But if there's anything urgent while I'm going along, we'll stop and deal with it. Now, I'm delighted there's so many people here, clearly from all around the world. And yes, if you can just put in the chat where you're from. I can see 1 or 2 already from Greece, from Sofia. We got Berlin, Evan, St. Petersburg, Macedonia, London. I was in London last week. Italy. Probably not a good morning today if you're a football fan in Italy. Netherlands, China. Wow, it seems like we have the whole world here. This is fantastic. I'm just looking at the chat go through. Now, Vietnam, Spain, fantastic. Spain probably happier than Italy. I am a football fan, but I won't talk too much about football today. Now, while you're listening to me and looking at me, and your eyes are trying to get used to what I look like, and your ears are trying to get used to what I sound like, you might notice that there's a bit of a difference between the picture that you'll see on the slide and the picture that you see of me today. If you can just put in the chat what you think the biggest difference is between those 2 photos. What's the biggest difference? No glasses, beard. Cool. Okay. Black and white. One's in black and white. Very good. Older, says Evan. Thank you, Evan. One of my best friends. Smiling in the photo, the glasses and the beard, the age. Ha ha, the way I'm dressed. Slimmer. Which is slimmer, now or on the photo? I'm not sure. Anyway. Ha ha ha. Your brow. What's happened to my brow? Am I looking more worried now? No hair. I don't have any hair on either photo. Okay, some interesting comments, some very nice comments, some funny comments. Thank you very much. This session today is not really about my appearance, but I suspect that at the end there may only be one thing that you really remember, and therefore I've retitled the talk. Very bad thing to do. I've called it A Story of Latin, Italians, and Beards. And I suspect that maybe in a week's time, the only thing some of you will remember is the beard. And I'll explain a little bit more about the beard in a moment. Okay. Now, I'd be very happy if, I say this at the beginning because I say at the end, I forget to say it. I'd be very happy for all of you or any of you to contact me via LinkedIn. Jane has already said a few things about me. I have dual nationality, having been living in Munich for 35 years. My background is in economics. I worked as a English teacher and a business English teacher. My main experience as far as teaching goes with English is in the business English area, or what I like to call English for the world of work, English to help people do their jobs. I've had various roles. I was at a publishing house in Germany for 20 years. And as Jane said, I was the editor-in-chief of 2 magazines, the first one for general English and the second one, Business Spotlight, for work-related English. And the book you see on the right is the latest publication with my longtime co-author, Bob Dignan, a trainer in England. And I just have to say that despite the fact this book has a German title, because it's published by a German publisher, there is no German at all in the book. The whole book is in English. So just by word of explanation, because that sometimes confuses people. Anyway, let's move on. So what are we trying to affect? Now, I'm pretty sure that today we have an audience of people working in a wide range of contexts. Maybe, again, you can just put in the chat, what is your teaching context? Is it general English? Is it business English? Is it English for a very specific purpose? Is it young learners? Who are you teaching in your job? So if you could just add it into the chat, then I can just see as it's going through. Yeah. So as I suspected a mixture of general, business English, specific, exam preparation, university, secondary schools. Okay, so we've got, keep them coming. I'm watching. So we have a wide range of different contexts in which people are teaching. And then I hope that what I'm going to say today, although my background is, in the world of English for work, I hope that some of the things I say today will be relevant to all of you and will also maybe just provoke you into thinking a little bit about more of what you're doing. So the 4 areas that I chose as the topics for this talk, and again, maybe I should say at the beginning, it became clearer and clearer to me as I was preparing this that, of course, these areas overlap. It's quite hard to talk about these as distinctive areas, but I think there are some different elements, which is why it's worth just listing them separately. Are we trying to influence, as teachers and trainers, people's language, their passive language skills, their active language skills? That might seem like an obvious one, or what we say a no-brainer. Are we trying to influence their communication skills? And then it gets a bit more controversial. Are we trying to influence their behaviour? Are we trying to influence the way people behave? And possibly, you might think even more controversial, are we trying to influence people's culture? Are we trying to affect, and when I say affect, obviously we mean change, people's culture? And that might sound a strange thing. Now, the area I'm going to concentrate, I say most on, is actually the communication one, but I'm going to say something about all the other areas based on my experience as a teacher, as a trainer, a teacher trainer, and in particular as a publisher of materials for business English. And I can see people saying here a mixture of all. Yes, if you want a spoiler, the answer is going to be all of these. So if you want to now go away and make a cup of tea or have a cup of coffee, then you can come back in half an hour. The answer will be all of these. But I hope you don't disappear, because I'd like to explain why I come to that conclusion. So let's move on and start with the first one, which is language. Now, this really might seem the most obvious one. I mean, we're language teachers, we're language trainers, we're publishers of language materials, we're examiners, we have maybe other language contexts. So it would be bizarre to say that we are not trying to influence people's language. If people came to us and following the training that we did with them, or the teaching, the university courses, or the materials we publish, or the online apps, or whatever it is, if we came to them and after they'd spent time and money with us, their language hadn't changed, then I think they would expect to get their money back, because that's the business that we're in. The business where they're in is influencing people's language. My Spanish is not very good. My Italian is more or less non-existent, apart from a few words. So if I'm going to go to those countries, if I'm going to function in any context, whether it's a social context, whether it's a professional context, I want somebody or some product or an app to help me develop my language skills. Now, I'll tell you a little story now about Latin. Remember Latin? This is going to be about Latin, Italians, and beards. My 2 big Latin lessons, and actually this was my first really important lesson in communicative language learning, except that I didn't learn the lesson until 20 years after this particular event happened. So what was the event? I grew up in England. I went to school. I learnt French as the first foreign language. I never used it because we never went to France, or maybe once for a holiday. So my productive French skills weren't very good. I later went a few more times to France, Paris in particular, and I had the feeling my French skills got a bit better. They seemed to get better when I drank a little bit of alcohol. Not too much, but that seemed to help, or at least I thought they were better. Whether they really were better, I don't know. But Latin was my second language at school. And I had a choice between German, Spanish and Latin. And for some reason I can't explain to you, I chose Latin. In many ways, I wish I hadn't, because people often say Latin is a good basis for learning Spanish and Italian, for example, Romance languages. And I think, to be honest, if you want to learn Spanish, then just learn Spanish. That will also help you. You don't need to learn Latin. But I'm not against Latin. I loved Latin at school. I absolutely loved Latin at school. So my language skills my passive skills were fantastic. By the end, I could read texts, I could translate them, I could do all the things you needed for the exam, except for one thing. On my exam paper, they asked us to find in the Latin text 2 examples of pathos. And my problem was that I didn't know what the word pathos meant in English, an English word that comes from the Greek. It seemed a bit unfair putting a Greek word in the Latin test. So I didn't know what I was looking for in this text. I knew what the text meant. I just didn't know what to look for because I didn't know the word pathos. I do know what it means now, but I didn't know as a 16-year-old. Anyway, as a 16-year-old, I think 15 actually, we go on a family holiday to Italy. And I speak no Italian, but remember, my Latin is fantastic, I thought. So I decided what I would do would be to talk to the Italians there in Latin. You can laugh at me, it's not a problem. Keep the laughing emojis coming. I decided as a 15-year-old to talk Latin to the Italians. And I very quickly learnt 2 lessons, but I didn't realize the significance of them until, I say, 20 years later when I started teaching. My first lesson was Italians don't speak Latin. They were speaking some other language that didn't sound like Latin. It sounded like Italian, because that's what they speak. So there's one first problem. And my second problem was, neither do I. So I had fantastic Latin skills. I was great at reading texts. I was fantastic at translating. But when I opened my mouth and tried to say, I'd like a cappuccino, please, in Latin, nothing came out of my mouth whatsoever, or a beer or whatever I wanted. Nothing came out of my mouth in Latin at all. And why didn't it come out? Well, it's pretty obvious to all of you, because for useful communication phrases were not part of the Latin syllabus at school. We didn't do task-based learning. We didn't do little role plays going into a cafe and ordering a cafe in Latin. It wasn't on the syllabus. We were learning about Caesar's Gallic Wars and other stories. So I didn't really realize at the time. I was just confused. 20 years later, when I'm a teacher, I realized what was going on here, that the language that I'd learnt, important though it was for a particular context, wasn't helping me as soon as I moved to another context. I hadn't learned Latin for communicative purposes, or Latin even for specific social purposes. I'd learnt Latin for translation purposes primarily. Just moving on, when we talk about language, though, I still think there is a tendency to think that the more language we, in the old days, one would have said poured into our learners, or that we help our learners to acquire, the better they're going to become at using the language and communicating. Now, obviously, you need language up to a certain point. As again, I say, let me imagine I'm going to Spain. I've got to give a presentation in Spanish. I need quite a lot of language to do that. But having more and more language doesn't make you a better communicator, and we'll move then on to the question of communication. Now, you could say something, you could actually argue it might make you a worse communicator, but not necessarily. So some of you, or a lot of you, I'm sure, will have seen reports, one on the BBC years ago, saying that the worst communicators were native speakers of English. I regard this as a dreadful headline and actually a pretty awful attitude. I don't believe the native speakers, to use that term, I know I'm using it with inverted commas. I don't believe native speakers of any language are necessarily the worst communicators. I don't believe non-native speakers or learners of a language, users of another language, are necessarily the worst communicators. The people who are the worst communicators are the worst communicators in whatever language. So I sometimes confuse people when I say I'm a non-native speaker, and they look at me and they go, "No, you're not, Ian." I said, "Yeah, I am, of German." I would be traditionally defined as a non-native speaker of a whole range of languages, including, obviously, Latin. So I don't become a better communicator when I switch to another language. If I'm a poor communicator, I'm probably a poor communicator in whatever language I use. That is not to argue that people who are classified as native speakers don't cause communication problems. Of course they do. People speak too quickly, people use complicated language, use idioms, etc., etc., etc. But people using a second language also cause communication problems. In fact, we all do. I sometimes describe human beings as what I call walking, talking communication problems. We're going around causing communication problems and misunderstandings the whole time. And actually, as it says on this slide, we can actually do some very important and sophisticated tasks by using very simple language, such as this sentence here. I trust you fully with this project, possibly from a boss to a member of the team or a team leader to a team. I trust you fully with this project. There is nothing there which is difficult language. You don't need to be C2 or C20 to be able to say a sentence like that, and it can be extremely powerful and help to build trust in a business context. So it's a very important message for language users and also for teachers and trainers to help people use the language that they've got in different combinations, to put the words together differently to get clear messages across. Now, some of you will know what a corpus is, a collection of language, and I'm not a corpus linguist, but occasionally I transcribe bits of language that I hear, and I heard this one on the BBC radio a few years ago. And I think if you read this, if you maybe put in the chat what you think the problem is with this comment that this guy made on BBC radio at 7:30 in the morning, what problems do you see with that? Just drop something in, put something in the chat. Or do you not see any? Too many fillers, so ums and ers and whatever. Too long, not straight to the point, Yeah, okay, so well, actually, the funny thing is that I didn't notice all the fillers until I transcribed it. When I was listening to it on the radio, and I thought it was pretty awful when I listened to it on the radio, and I started laughing on the street. I'm sorry to laugh. I shouldn't laugh at people, but I was laughing what I heard. But it wasn't because of the fillers. I didn't notice them until I transcribed it. And if I take the fillers out, which you can see here, I've deleted all the fillers, and what's left is in yellow. That's what I was laughing about, because I thought this is marketing jargon at 7:30 in the morning to a general audience. Now, the marketing people, and I say I'm not criticizing anybody who works in marketing or any other area, because we all have our own jargons, but this was for a general audience. So to talk about what he's basically saying is we've got a great range of products at different prices, at a range of prices. That's basically what he's saying. And if he'd said we have a great range of products at different prices, everybody would have understood. But if you talk about an amazing portfolio to deliver consumer solutions to every price point, then some people understand that, but most of them don't. So if we're helping people with language, we're helping them to speak simply and clearly to get their message across. As in the previous example, I trust you fully with this project, and ideally not to talk like this unless you're speaking to a very specialized audience who are used to this kind of language, in which case it may well be appropriate. Good. So I'm going to move on quickly to the second of the two areas that I have, which clearly overlaps, because I mean, language and communication, it's hard to separate them. We can communicate without language. We communicate with our facial expressions, without saying anything, with our body language. But language is clearly key to communication. And I think, well, I would hope that most people in the teaching and training industry now would think that they are not teaching language purely for the sake of teaching language. They're not teaching language as my Latin teacher was. And that was no criticism of him. He was fantastic. But he was teaching us to language to translate and do grammar exercises, but not for communicative purposes. And in most contexts, it's about communication. Sometimes it's not. I realize for exam purposes, that may not be the main thing. But as soon as you go out and want to use your language, it's about communication. And my longtime co-author, Bob Dignan, about 10 years ago, I interviewed him and I asked him a very simple question. And it was this: why? I said to him, Bob, why is communication so difficult? I thought this was an easy question to start an interview because it would give him a chance to talk about this whole area of communication problems. Maybe, again, in the chat, just put your answer to this question. Why is communication so difficult? Try to put a 1 or 2 word answer in the chat. If you don't think it's difficult, say it isn't. People, I like that. Cultural differences, people, interpretation, people's different backgrounds. Yeah, the message doesn't come across, misunderstandings. Exactly, perception. All sorts of other non-linguistic features. A lot about cultural backgrounds, interpretations of meaning. Yeah, these are all very good points. Actually, none of these were the miscommunication. Yeah, none of these were the things that Bob gave in his answer, and that's why it kind of surprised me. But this was his very simple answer. What exactly do you mean by difficult? And this little conversation between the two of us, I've never forgotten. So I say, why is communication so difficult? And Bob says, what do you mean by difficult? In other words, what he's doing here is he's clarifying my meaning. He's asking me, what do you mean by this question? He hasn't assumed that he has understood what I meant. My problem was in this interview that I didn't really know what I meant by the question. I just thought it was a nice, easy question to get things going. And what I got back was not a nice answer, but a question back to me. What do you mean by difficult? And there's an important lesson here for communication, that questions are often the key to good communication. So, and this, I'll show you this again, this comment again later. If we assume that we don't understand what people have said, and we don't understand why they've said it, we're probably a lot closer to the truth than if we assume, which we normally do, that we understand. So Bob is somebody who clarifies things a lot. So this question, what do you mean by, or what exactly do you mean by, is a very powerful question because it does two things. First, it makes clear I'm not assuming that I know what you mean. And second, it gives the speaker the opportunity to say more exactly what you meant. Now, I had to quickly think of something because Bob's asking me what I mean, and I hadn't thought about this enough. And I said, well, it's, I don't know, a lot of people send their messages out into the world, or they're talking to somebody and they don't think their message gets across. And he said to me, "Oh, okay, that's. I see you have a very one-sided view of communication. Ian, it's all about you sending your message out, or people sending their messages out. What about the person who's listening? What about somebody's mentioned listening in the chat? If you're a good listener, communication is not difficult." I wouldn't agree with that entirely, but it's a good point. I think listening skills are essential, but communication is still difficult, even with good listening skills. But questions are the key. So again, to stop and think, when somebody says something, or when you read an email from somebody, do you know what they mean, or do you need to clarify? A very important communication skill. And again, for example, this could be a very simple sentence from a team leader to a team member on a project. How are you doing with that report? Now, again, this is not C2. This is very simple language. It's not complexity of language here, which is causing a problem if there is a problem. And the question is, what does that mean? How are you doing with that report? And it could mean a number of different things. Again, while I'm talking, feel free to put your ideas into the chat as to what you think that means. If a team leader says that to a team member, what would the team leader mean? This means, did you finish? Have you finished it? Mm-hmm. Are you How far are you from the deadline? How's it going? Do you need help? Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so any problems? So even looking at your comments there, you've picked up a range of possible meanings, and we can't know what it means without knowing the context and the situation. And I think your answers basically divide into three categories. One is, well, actually, mainly two categories. Some of you are asking a factual question. You're saying this is purely factual. It's purely asking for information. It's neutral. How are you doing? Some of you are actually interpreting it positive, which is great. You're seeing it as, do you need help? Can I help you? So it's actually really positive. I haven't seen anybody yet, but I might be wrong that, somebody here, yeah, you should be working on the report instead of whatever nonsense it is you're actually doing. Mark, thank you very much. Yeah, so it could obviously be negative. It could be, why is the report not finished? What on earth are you doing? Why are you drinking coffee? Etc. So even a very simple message like this with very simple language can have a range of interpretations from very negative to very positive, and in the middle being relatively neutral. What about the beards then? What about the beards? Now, I don't normally have a beard. I should tell you that. I don't normally have a beard, but occasionally I do. But what I typically do is I let it grow for a few days, and then I think it looks scruffy, or somebody tells me it looks awful when I shave it off. So that's my normal routine. I don't shave every day, but I don't grow a beard normally. And when I do, if I do let it grow longer, then the typical reaction I get, I'll show you on the next slide. And you can think for yourself, if you want to put it in the chat, feel free. I won't be offended whatever you put. Oh, sorry, I went the wrong way. Let's go back to the beard. There we are. I had 4 different comments on the beard over different times. First one is, it makes you look older. Okay? Now, I always thought this was true. I always thought basically beards make people look older. And therefore, if you're a man, if you want to look younger, then what you do is you grow a beard while you're young, and then you shave it off when you get older and you look younger. So that's basically my not particularly sophisticated view on beard. Mark, you're too nice. You say it makes me look distinguished. Trim it to make it look better. Yeah, exactly. Keep the comments coming. I will capture the chat and then I can learn from them later. So this is basically the view that I've had until about 2 weeks ago, that beards make people look older. Beards make me look older. Whatever. Okay. Some people think it looks cool. Others think it should go. Okay, it's fine. Now, my problem was, this was my view until about 2 weeks ago. It was pretty clear that I was pretty clear on what message the beard was sending, not the beard was sending. I thought it was sending a message, I'm looking older. Until somebody said to me 2 weeks ago, it makes you look younger. You look younger with a beard. And suddenly, my whole interpretation of beards was blown apart, because now somebody's telling me it makes me look younger. Now, what's the point of this? And why is this related at all to communication? The point is that when we send a message out into the world with our words or with our look, then people interpret them. And I thought that I knew what the people's interpretation was. Beards equals older, until somebody said beards equal younger. Now, you don't have to agree or disagree with this. I'm not even sure whether it makes any sense at all, these comments. But suddenly I'm confronted by the fact that different people have interpreted the same thing in a completely different way. And then 2 days ago, on Tuesday this week, and I'm not making this up, somebody said to me, it doesn't make you look older. Out of the blue, I hadn't even said anything. It said, oh, hello, Ian, you've got a beard. It doesn't make you look older. Now, what does that mean? That's neither the first one nor it's the second one. So here we've got a third interpretation. And then yesterday, I got another one from I think an 8 or 9 year old girl. She said to me, she looked at me and she said, you don't look like you normally do. And I thought, okay, I'll keep the beard for this talk today to make it a point of discussion. And the point is that whatever message we send out, we have no idea how people are going to interpret it. And also people are going to interpret it in a whole range of different ways. And that's something we need to know, whether it's our words or whether it's our physical appearance. Everybody interprets it differently. We cannot be sure that if somebody reacts in a particular way to something we say, that everybody else will also react in that way. And as soon as this talk is over, I will shave the beard off, probably. Experiment over. So remember the beard, the messages we think we're sending are not necessarily the messages that are coming to other people. And in particular, people are interpreting them differently. So just a reminder, again, assume in communication that you don't understand what other people say, and assume that other people are not understanding your message. And if you do that as your basic principle, you're probably closer to the truth than assuming that you have been understood and that you understand. We could go into that in more detail, but I'll move on quickly from that. Oh, that's a more philosophical way of putting it. If you want a bit of philosophy, doubt is the origin of wisdom. I tried to put together 7 ideas to summarize 20 years of working on communication strategies. And the ones I came up with were that are not necessarily universal, but I think they have a wide application. Listen to people longer before we interrupt them and come with our views. Reserve judgment until we've thought more and got more facts. Be curious, ask questions, but also be interested in the answers. No good just asking questions. Look for positive intent in what other people's messages. It's there more often than we think. It's quite hard to do, I know. Try to be as clear as you can. There are situations when being vague can be a virtue. Politicians are often vague. It's not necessarily a virtue. Clarify what other people are saying and get a lot from a little. What I mean by that is what I said, use simple language to do difficult tasks. That's a very quick run through. I hope these will be available to you. If anybody wants to have them directly from me, I'll send them to you. So let's move on and look at behaviour as the third one. And the next 2 I'm going to spend less time on than communication, you'll be pleased to know. But I believe fundamentally we are, as trainers and teachers, trying to affect people's behaviour. Now, some people don't like this thought. It sounds manipulative. It sounds that we're trying to get other people to do things that they don't want to do. No, we're not trying to change people's character and personality, even if we sometimes think we might like to. That's not our job. But our job is to change people's behaviour. But what do I mean by that? What I mean is get people to do things differently to the way they're doing it now. And what I'll give an example is working for example, in a team context. The point of training is to get people to do things differently after than they were doing before. So when we ask people what the biggest problems of working in international teams, again, feel free to comment, but the ones that typically come up are language issues, cultural issues, I'll say a little bit more about that, and remoteness. People, particularly since the pandemic, working remotely. And of course, these things can cause problems. I think they can be overrated. Even when we all work in the same office, we don't all sit in the same room. We communicate via email and we used to communicate via telephones. But the bad news is the main problem may be none of these things. It may be, unfortunately, that person that we see when we look in the mirror. In other words, us and our attitudes that we bring. And therefore, a key aspect of helping people to develop and improve, for example, their teamwork, is to get them to think about their own attitudes, to think about their own behavior, to think about how adaptable they are, how tolerant they are of other approaches, and by reflecting on this, to think, is there something that I can do to change my behavior, to make myself more adaptable? Self-reflection, exactly. Self-reflection and self-assessment. This is a little table that Bob and I used at the beginning of the book that we mentioned at the beginning, to get people to reflect on their own communication skills and their own attitudes, their mindset. Somebody mentioned mindset earlier in this in the chat. How flexible is my mindset when I'm working internationally? Can we help people to become more flexible? One way to do that is by getting them to consider little situations. You could call critical instance, or you could call them beards for short, to look at things and appreciate there's different ways of interpreting them and understanding that other people will have different interpretations. How well can I manage people with different communication styles? So all this is about understanding what my approach to work is, the way I like to do things, and that other people do things differently, and that maybe I need to adapt my behavior in certain circumstances. And therefore, as trainers, as teachers, and I would say not only in the business world, we're trying to help people, obviously, to develop language skills, and then with language skills to develop communication skills, but we're also getting them to develop the way they behave. So in other words, the way they react when other people want to do things differently. Do they see that as a threat, or do they see that as an opportunity? Are they able to do different things to help build trust? For example, simply, it's no good understanding the sentence, "I trust you fully with this project," if you don't change your behavior to actually say that. Maybe you're a sort of person that thinks it doesn't give people positive feedback, but thinks everybody can read your mind and know that you appreciate them. And maybe in certain contexts, you need to be more vocal about that. So we're definitely helping people to change their behavior. In other words, to do things differently to the way they did it before, linguistically, but also non-linguistically. So that can be, for example, tolerance of different approaches, different attitudes. That was a very quick one on behavior, but culture in a way will be even quicker, because I want to finish in a few minutes, because this is the one that I think people have most reservations. But if I say we're trying to affect people's culture, so imagine that I'm a trainer and I've got a team of people, an international team of people working on a project, and my job is to help them to work effectively together. And I say, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change your culture. And people's initial reaction might be very negative. They say, what do you mean you're going to change my culture? My culture's me. That's how I am. This sounds terrible. It's not as terrible as it sounds. Because the first thing we have to get away from is the idea, which is slowly dying, but only very slowly, that culture is equivalent to country. Most people, when they hear culture, they still think country, and there are still books out there that equate these two things. They equate that somebody from a certain country has certain characteristics, certain ways they like doing things. This way of approaching culture goes back a long way and is still very prevalent. A better way of thinking of culture is that, and a more modern way, is the thinking that all of us, everybody, we're all influenced by a huge range of factors. And these influence the way we think, our attitudes, our beliefs, also are the way we like doing things, the way we like to communicate, the way we like to behave. For example, in teams, the way we like discussions to go, the way we like decisions to be taken, the way we like conflicts to be resolved. And our culture, our way of thinking and doing things, the way we like doing things, is influenced by so many factors that go beyond simply the country that we maybe were born in or grew up in or live in now. Those are influences, of course, but so are other influences: family, religion, maybe politics, social structure, or social class, if you want to call it that, people's social beliefs, and then when you move into the world of work, there are differences depending on which department people work in, which type of company, size of company. There's a whole range of factors that everybody brings with them, which is their culture. And if we can get away from equating culture with country, then we've made a lot of progress. And when we move into the team, then, okay, here's a team. Now, we don't know what's going on here in this picture, obviously, but here's 4 people. And if this is the team, then what this team needs to do, and I think somebody mentioned it in the chat earlier, is that they need to create their own culture. So this is what I mean by affecting culture. It's not going at the individual level and saying, you shouldn't have these beliefs, you shouldn't think that. It's getting all the team members to bring their different beliefs and preferences and working styles into a team, and then to decide, in this case, these 4 people, how are we going to work together as a team? What is going to be the team culture that we're going to create? How are we going to take decisions? How are we going to communicate? What channels are we going to use? How are we going to make decisions? Are decisions final when we make them? Are we going to look at them again? How are we going to resolve conflicts? These are all things which a team is deciding what its own culture is going to be. In other words, the culture is the result and it's not the cause. So the team creates its own culture. And my experience also from working is that teams do not do this enough. They do not spend enough time thinking and creating their own team culture before they start work. What they do sometimes is have a kickoff event, which may be a kind of getting to know each other and stuff. And, you know, where are we going and what's our goal for the team? That's good. But they don't spend enough time thinking how they're going to work together and actually documenting maybe that. What is our team culture going to be? We all come with different ideas, different preferences, but for this purpose, for this project, what's going to be our unique team culture, as Yasmin says there. And that's really important. And in that sense, yes, we're trying to affect culture if we're going into, for example, a business context and helping a team to work more effectively. I only have a couple more slides, don't worry. This one summarizes what I just said. Teams need to spend time creating their own culture rather than obsessing about national differences as sources of cultural problems, which has been a kind of traditional approach. The next step on has been to say, yes, well, okay, instead of seeing this as problems, we see this as opportunities, the benefits of cultural diversity. And the step beyond that is to say, yes, not just are they potential sources of benefit and cultural diversity, we're going to explicitly create our own team culture for this particular team, this particular purpose. Right. And so just to summarize, what are we trying to change then when we're teaching, when we're training? We're trying to change language, obviously. We're trying to change people's communication skills in particular, but not only, helping them to use that language more effectively. We are trying to change their behavior. We want them to do things differently to the way they've done them in the past, and therefore to communicate better. And when we're working with teams, we want to change their culture, not their individual personality, not their individual beliefs, but we want them to change their culture for the purpose of working together in this team. I mean, unless they're all 100% aligned from the start, and there's no need to do that, but I would guess that's for rare. And in fact, we should never assume that that's the case. So the spoiler that I told you half an hour ago, you could have gone off and had a cup of coffee or something, is potentially all of the above. Potentially, because it will always depend on the context that we are working in. And this is not easy. This is not easy to do this. And maybe in the chat, the last thing I'll ask you to do is just to complete this sentence as a gap fill. Come on, we're teachers. You're teachers. You love gap fills. Perfect. Practice makes perfect. 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 Life is not easy. Perfect. 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 Keep them coming. Gap fill. Complete this sentence. Because doing any of these things, developing our language, developing our communication, changing our behavior, changing our culture is not easy, and therefore we need to practice it. And most of you, not all of you, have put perfect, which is good, is what I wanted you to put, but it's not the answer that I wanted. This is the answer that I wanted, or the answer that I was thinking of. Practice makes permanent. This is something I learned when I was going back to football, soccer. I was qualified as a soccer coach some years ago, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And the trainer said to us, practice doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent. In other words, if you do something the wrong way, you'll always do it the wrong way. So you need to practice doing it the right way. And if you do it the right way, that will become permanent. In other words, somebody said muscle memory, whatever you do will become the way you do it. And therefore, we need to remember that. It's not just practice on its own that produces the result. It's practice doing it the right way. And that's why we're there as teachers and trainers, to help people. So thank you for that. Do contact me via LinkedIn. As I said, here I've put two pictures side by side so that you can remember the beard. The problem with the beard is that you do this all the time, I've noticed, which I don't do as much when I don't have a beard. But I would be delighted to hear from any of you. LinkedIn is the easiest way to find me. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your active participation in the chat. And now we have just under 10 minutes for any specific questions.
Thank you so much, Ian, for your fantastic presentation.